Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's SWE changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 71 with the title, Not an Ally, Be an Accomplice and Co-conspirator. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Erica Simon. Erica describes herself as a clinical psychologist and consultant whose work is strongly rooted in social justice. When I asked Erica to describe her superpower, she said she is very comfortable with uncertainty, ambiguity, and discomfort, and she truly cares and wants to get it right, not just feel like I am right. Hello, Erica. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hello, Joanne. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
Awesome. Fabulous. So, Erica, I know we were chatting just now. So what do you mean by not just being an ally, but you want to be an accomplice and co-conspirator?
It's a really interesting conversation that's being had these days around allyship. And what's really particularly important about this conversation around allyship is that allyship is what you do in your actions. We can't just call ourselves an ally. It's what are we actually doing? So allyship is also kind of rooted in this, it has this tone to it as if I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you. And one of the things that has really been an important part of my journey around social justice is understanding how much we have to have skin in the game. If we're going to truly seek out true justice for all, equality for all, if we're going to see a world where all of our identities are celebrated and welcomed, then we all have to have some skin in the game. And so we don't get to just say, hey, I'm here and I support you. We have to do that in every action that we take as best as we can. And so I strongly subscribe to the quote, Martin Luther King Jr. of, none of us are free until we are all free. And it's not about me saying, you need help. It's about me saying that I'm not free either. This world is not okay until we all have achieved the recognition that we deserve for being a whole person and showing up for who we are. And that's really important. So my actions have to align with that. My actions have to demonstrate that. We're in this together.
That's fantastic. And I think we probably all heard this mantra that being an ally is a verb. It's about doing, isn't it? And too often we can forget that. Too often we can just take a day off or not step up. And as you quite rightly say, it's people who come from these marginalized, underrepresented communities, characteristics, live and breathe the challenges day in, day out. And they do not have the privilege to be able to take that off and put it down for a day and then pick it up when it suits. So it's so important, as you say, to be a co-conspirator, because I think the other thing part of what you're saying there is it's not just about supporting you or understanding your pain. It's about understanding what's causing your pain, how you and I and we can step up and remove the root cause, not just the sticky plaster or the Savlon or the little cream we put on. It's tackling proactively our governments, our lawmakers, the people in authority that create these social constructs, these injustices in the first place.
Absolutely. There are systems and structures that are in place that maintain oppression, that maintain inequality, that maintain the biases and the discrimination. The systems are working exactly how they were designed to work. And that's just simply not okay. And we have to go in and really, as you're saying, root out the causes. And we have to examine our unearned privileges that we have, the ways that we get to show up and sort of, in a lot of ways, kind of be invisible when we want to be, depending on which, privileges, we wear. And exactly as you're saying, we can take a day off. If you want to be an ally, and this is why the term is just such a problem, we can just decide to take a day off, or maybe we decide that in this moment, we're not going to speak up. And that is a tremendous privilege that people do not understand that they have, that we can pick and choose when we say something or not say something. My mother always said growing up, character is who you are in the dark. It was a big mantra of our family. Character is who you are in the dark. And it's a kind of, in a way, the opposite of what I'm saying now, which is that, sometimes character is doing the hard thing. It's saying the thing. It's living your values and the things that matter, even when it's really, really hard to do that. And I think that is a big part of the conversation as well, to be a co-conspirator and accomplice.
I love that phrase. It's shouting at me saying, you got to do the heavy lift, even when no one's thanking you or looking at you or seeing you. You do it because you do it, not for recognition. I think it's important. And I always say, when I talk about allyship, and I know we're trying to move past allyship, is that there is no medal. And I also I don't believe you can call yourself an ally. I think ally is bestowed on you. It's like, I don't think you can call yourself an entrepreneur. I think someone else calls you an entrepreneur. They call you an ally. And if you feel worthy enough, then you can step up to it. So I think, character is who you are in the dark, when no one's watching, and when you're not looking for recognition. It's your default base instinct. And I think that is really, really powerful. And I mean, what's the political climate or the social climate where you are? You're in California, is that right?
I am.
So yeah. So I'm in the UK and England. We've moved past the previous presidential administration, but is that rhetoric is still there, isn't it? I mean, we've the impact for the Supreme Court, the Roe versus Wade, trans rights. Each state is now, many states are very right wing, very kind of anti woke, for want of a better way of putting it. So, what does it feel like if you're in a minority in the States at the moment?
It's an interesting time to live, and I'm using that word very specifically. It's an interesting time to be living in the US, because we sort of simultaneously have seen this explosion of a new civil rights movement. We've seen this tremendous change in how we even acknowledge individuals who are transgender. We have completely changed how much racism has been exposed. It used to be, I wrote a paper actually in undergrad about how, racism had become so insidious to where we could talk about being post-racial, for example, and it in a way that it ends up being a bigger problem, because then people can just not acknowledge the oppression that different groups experience. What's interesting is we have this civil rights movement that's happening, and at the same time, we have this terrible rhetoric that's so extreme that has been emboldened to not only have hateful, bigoted, beliefs, but to say them, to speak them, and to have them be emboldened from the most powerful position in the country. And some would say the world. That's a whole different conversation. But to have those at the same time, it's that and both of those things there are true. It's interesting. I'm a clinical psychologist, and there's a treatment and intervention called dialectical behavioral therapy. It's very powerful, and one of the concepts out of this particular form of therapy is how to help people live in an and, to see an and in the situation. And one of the concepts is truth stands side by side. It can be 100% true that the US is in this brilliant civil rights, movement is happening at this exact moment. And we also have the most hateful rhetoric emboldened in every way. And it's everywhere. It's amazing how it's everywhere. And I think both of those are true, and it's palpable. It's really palpable, and you see it. So many hate crimes that occur, while at the same time we're also starting in this beautiful way to acknowledge. I mean, I just see how far we've come around transgender rights and acknowledgement across my 17 years as a clinician. And to see where we're at this moment, where people are sharing their pronouns, that we actually don't even call them preferred pronouns anymore, that they're just pronouns. I think that there's something, at some point, we kind of expose in this very raw way a lot of the pain that people have experienced in silence. And we're trying to do something about it.
From my own lived experience, I see a polarity between what's going on in my life, which for me, I appreciate. I'm privileged. I don't have any issues being me. I'm married, 2 children, adult children who've left home. I've got a good source of income. I've got a great network of friends, a global business. I don't have any trouble being me. And I know many people who are also transgender, professionals in business, also have a very positive life. And you look at what's going on in the world of business, big corporates, organizations, the trans support is positive. Everyone wants to learn more, find out, have great policies, respect their people, the staff networks, the prides. Everybody has a momentum around trans rights. But then you turn on the television, we see our politicians. We had a leadership competition in the summer, and the 6 or 7 contenders for that were trying to prove who could be the most anti-trans as part of the debates. It was like, we've got major global issues. We've got Ukraine and Putin. We've got fuel issues going on. We've got poverty. We've got civil rights issues. And you want to talk about denying trans people their rights and have a competition so you could be the most transphobic. I think suddenly I'm being debated about as a political football. And this is like crazy. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you heard the expression, the dead cat. When you have a news story, you talk about the dead cat, not about the story. So everyone was trying to avoid the big issues and just talk about this dead cat of trans people. I'm not saying we're dead cats, but it's kind of that distraction technique. And now we have whilst our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is unknown, I suppose, in some of these areas, but he's quite measured, I believe. We still have some far right people in his party in government who are still openly talking about trying to wind back transgender protection. And you think, well, hang on a minute. This is going against what the majority of the world, the UK world, maybe some of the other Western world are talking about already. The countries are passing laws to make it easier to obtain legal recognition for their gender. And our government is trying to make it harder and harder and harder, and even talking about removing some rights. You think, hang on a minute. This isn't what the mood of the country is. This seems to be the extremists with the loud voices, and I think your previous administration plays to the fears and unites these different sorts of hate into one big hate. I think that's what we end up doing.
I do agree completely. It's there's so many disconnects in a lot of ways, between governments and people who are, within a country, and their beliefs and their opinions and their thoughts. And I think it's interesting because in the US, it's like there's this push pull that's constantly happening, like what you're saying, where like over here, the government, the people are saying, hey, let's just all be. And then you have this pull this direction with the government saying, okay, yeah, let's give some right, we're going to give rights, we're going to acknowledge, we're going to protect. And then that gets pulled back. And there's sort of this push and pull between, do we or don't we? And I just trying to hold in my mind the experience of being a political point of discussion just for being who I am, just how exquisitely painful just that fact must be.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're trying to bring forward big changes in terms of the way society is constructed, when we think about, I look at some of the pushback on anti-racism, and we've got white people going, hang on a minute, we're being oppressed now because black people are getting all the help. And it's like, hang on a minute, no, you're not being oppressed. And as a great phrase I've heard is, when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And I think that's what's going on. It's where people are starting to feel the equality or the equity in society. And they're now having to look either side and have to compete. Whereas before they were way ahead and there was no one around them. So it's not like they're not being pulled back, but other people are being pushed forward to the start line, and it's becoming more level. And I think so we see that with people who are white when we talk about anti-racism. I think we see that in certain terms where we're talking about trans or gay rights or LGBTQ rights, where straight people are going, hang on a minute, we need pride as well. Or cis people are saying, hang on a minute, these trans people are taking over. We're talking about trans people all the time. Why can't we talk about me and my troubles? It's like, again, a bit like Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. It's Me Too type campaigns. And I think what we're seeing here is we must be making a difference because these conversations are happening. People must be starting to acknowledge their privilege, or they're feeling their privilege being challenged, because we are striving to make change. And I think, to me, that says we're doing something, but we've also got to have that pain of the pushback, haven't we? That you say, the push me, pull you, where we end up taking a bit and then we're almost stamped on. Hang on a minute, you've taken too much. Go back.
Yes, it's so true. And that is one of I regularly use that quote that when you're used to having a whole lot of unearned privilege, then equality feels like oppression is spot on, because we don't realize it's I don't know, his name is it James Fisher Wallace? Pretty close on his name. He had a commencement speech in, I don't know, it was like 2005. And he tells a story about there are these two young fish, and they're swimming in the water. And this older fish swims by and says, hey, hey, how's the water? And the two fish swim on and they look at each other and went, what's water? And I think this is foundationally how I view privilege, because we don't realize the water we're swimming in. We cannot see it until we see it. And that's the thing. It's whether it's gender or sexual identity, or it's, race, or it's religious identity or cultural identity, or a whole host of things, right? Age, size, there's all sorts of disability or ability. There are so many different ways that our identities impact us. And when you don't hold a certain identity, it is impossible to see how that identity is impacted by the world, by the environment, until something helps you to see it. And I really think that's where people are. Until you have, I think everybody should have to spend a few days trying to navigate the world in a wheelchair.
Yeah,
I would hope. Pardon me?
I've got a great friend who has cerebral palsy, and I've travelled around London with her. She has a powered wheelchair, getting on and off a bus, getting on the underground, navigating rooms that are too tight for a chair to fit through. I spent a day with her, and I came home thinking, I have a privilege. I can walk. I don't think about my legs. My legs, my body, my ability to move, made to be, is a privilege. She doesn't have that. She is problem solving from the moment she wakes up to the moment she falls asleep again, because everything she does in her life is complex compared with my life.
Exactly. And this is where it's not about allyship. It's about being an accomplice or a co-conspirator. I love, there's a TED Talk. Names are escaping me today. I don't know why. But there's a TED Talk. And it's really amazing how the title is something like, I'm not your, it's basically like, I'm not your point of like pity. I can't remember exactly what the title is, but it's something like that. It's this amazing TED Talk. And this woman was saying how people, when it comes to disability, we sort of will pity people, or we will sort of glorify, right? And we'll see it as like, I'm not your inspiration. Thank you very much. That's what it was. Something like that. Because we do one of two things with disability. We either pity the person, or we see them as their inspiration, right? Oh, if they can do it, then we can do it, right? And I think what you are speaking to so much is how when we step inside the experience of someone and go, oh my goodness, and we don't see it like the way you were describing your friend's experience was so beautiful, because you're talking about it from this place of, wow, like my friend has complexities to navigate from the time that she wakes up in the morning. And this is where we can see this as just seeing the facts of the situation. She struggles constantly. She has to figure out how to navigate all these things. I remember when there was another TED Talk, and they were the person who was speaking said that the ADA accessible ramp was the loading dock. And when you stop to think about this, someone in a motorized wheelchair who has to navigate around the back of the building, around a whole bunch of semis and things being loaded and unloaded to try and get into a building, we should be enraged by this. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't see this as, okay, well, people with disabilities, they need some extra accommodation. Why in the world would we build stairs instead of a ramp? When you think about it, you build a ramp and everybody can access the building. You build stairs and only some people can. We see disability like we have to give okay, we're going to give you some accessible something. Or we get really angry that the doors to the bathroom have to be a certain width. Or we get really annoyed because, a whole host of reasons we can get annoyed about it. Why in the world do we think it is okay for only some people to have access to a building that doesn't require a Herculean effort?
I think what we also forget sometimes is that workplace adjustments or societal adjustments that benefit people who have a disability also benefit people who don't have a disability. If I've got my luggage, I want to go massive suitcase. I don't have to lug it up the stairs. I can use that as well. Or if I am not feeling great one day, or maybe I've twisted an ankle or something, I can now access something as well. So we're not making solutions here for a minority. We're making solutions that everybody can use and benefit from. And I think that's the important thing to remember, is that we're not. We often think about it's for the people who are disabled. It's not. It's to create accessibility in our society, accessibility in our workplace. That means that my friend doesn't have to ask for help to use the toilet. And that I was when I'm thinking about an accessible workplace or accessible conference or anything I do, I always think, could my friend go to the toilet without asking someone for help in this venue? And I think about the route. I think, no, she's going to have to ask someone to help her open that door. Or she's going to have to ask someone, which is not too bad. I mean, just opening a door is not too bad. But there are certain places she goes where she really needs more help than that. And I was with her once, and a well-meaning, able-bodied designer designed an accessible elevating platform to take you up the stairs. And she pointed out to me the fact that the person who designed this must have made an assumption that the person who had a disability would have had a PA or someone with them to help them, because the button she needed to push to call the lift was higher than she could reach as a wheelchair user, also because she has limited movement in her arms. She can't lift her arms really above her shoulders. So she couldn't use the button to call the lift. And the door would open. When she got in there, again, the buttons to move floors weren't accessible, and they required her to have someone with her because they were behind her. So she goes in forwards and the buttons are behind, so assuming someone's going to be with her. So yes, we're designing these systems to help people, but we're also making people feel as though they have a disability because they can't use the systems on their own without asking for help. So that's disabling somebody through lack of planning. And I always say, I always use her as a yardstick for me, just thinking about, would this work for my friend? And it's because I think when we're designing systems in our workplace, when we're just even in projects, whatever we do in our work, we don't often have a voice in the room speaking up for people who aren't represented. So I'm left-handed. I've bought products that clearly weren't designed for left-handed people, and they work fine if you're right-handed. They don't work fine if you're left-handed. So you think even something as simple as being left-handed is often forgotten about.
You are just so spot on. I'm also left-handed. And my partner, it's hilarious because he really, so many times I'll be like really frustrated with something, and he really cannot understand why this particular can opener just won't work for me. He's like, it's just a can opener. Well, it's just a can opener to you, but it was made for someone who's right-handed. And so when I flip it over, the mechanism doesn't work the same way. And it's something so silly like a can opener, but everything is made for right-handed people, except for a few little special things. And then even those left-handed things, sometimes they're hard to use because we're so used to trying to navigate a right-handed world. And then all of a sudden the scissors are flipped over. And I'm like, I don't actually know how to use these scissors. And I think this is so exactly it. And I love what you're saying because you're talking about being an accomplice. When you go to a conference or the workplace, you're thinking about, how do I make sure that this would be accessible to my friend where she wouldn't have to ask for help? And that's the thing, that's seeing her humanity. It's not about sort of, I think in a lot of ways, we kind of infantilize individuals who have disabilities as if they need our, they just need some help, right? So why can't they just ask for someone to open the door for them? And in the end, being able to be autonomous and move through the workplace without having to constantly navigate difficult or awkward situations, we need to put the person, like you said, whose voice is not at the table, whose voice, it's not just about having diversity, like the whole DEI thing that is exploding right now in a lot of beautiful ways, but it also gets very tokenized. I have the one person who's Black. I have the one person who's transgender. I have the one person with disability. But if we don't have those voices at the table, if we don't amplify those voices and center them and say, what are we missing here? What are we not seeing? Where is the water that I am existing in? Please. And we can't ask for that emotional labor either. It's sort of this interesting thing that's happening right now too, where you can't just ask. You can't just tokenize someone. You have to understand, how do I do my own work to understand the water that I'm swimming in that I don't see? And then how do I really listen? And then in the workplace, especially, how do I make sure that everybody is represented? Everybody's voice is heard and amplified. And then what's actually happening in the workplace is representative of everybody's needs and preferences. It's super important. We can't just take a couple of those steps.
Yeah, I talk a lot about CQ, cultural intelligence, and for me, I know at the high level, you think about culture, you think about ethnicity and faith and all these big culture type things. And I always boil culture down to the little micro communities of disability, of deafness, of blindness, of transiness, or whatever it is, not just the big experiences. And often we start focusing on these big labels without looking down at the nuances in different communities. So someone who is born deaf has a different challenge than someone who's acquired their hearing impairment or their deafness throughout their life. Someone who was born blind and never seen has a different experience than someone who has become blind later in life. So if we're not careful, we make these big assumptions. Oh, they're blind. They can't see that. Oh, sorry, I talked about colour. You don't know what colour is, do you? Well, yes, I do. I can see for 30 years of my life. I know the grass is green. I remember what green looks like. So again, by not drilling down into the communities of culture, we can sometimes make these assumptions, false assumptions. So I always find that when I learn something about someone or a characteristic or about whatever that may be, a lived experience, the first element for me of CQ is about drive. I want to find out more. So if someone says to me, this space doesn't work for me, I'm neurodiverse, this space is too loud, too noisy, it's too random for me, I can't process all this going on in here. I go, okay, I need to find out more about this. I need to understand why. So when I'm in a space in future, I can go, this isn't going to work for neurodiverse people, or neurodiverse people that I've spoken to in the past would struggle with this environment because. So I'm not going to say I'm trying to become an expert in someone's lived experience, but I know more than I didn't know before. So it's allowing me to have those next conversations to say, I think we should do some thinking about this and get an expert in to talk about this. That's how I would approach it.
I love that too, because we can't be an expert in everybody's lived experiences. And there are a lot of textured nuances to different different lived experiences within more global kind of catch sort of how we describe identities. Even so, I think, well, I'll mention that in a minute. It's so interesting because with the neurodiversity conversation that you're bringing up, and I don't want to have that part pass by, because neurodiversity is a real thing that we're starting to really unpack and understand and celebrate. There's this idea of why are we trying to extinguish differences? There are so many beautiful ways that our brains work, and instead of seeing this as how we're trying to flatten that experience and try and find something normal or typical. And with neurodiversity, it's so true. Somebody actually called me out on this, and I was very grateful for the lesson. I do a lot of presentations. I do a lot of support sessions. I do a lot of talks. And in one of them, I was doing for a group, we were talking about how to have difficult conversations. And one of the point being made was around active listening, having open body language, having direct eye contact, reflecting back, all these different things, being really kind of sitting and being present. And afterwards, somebody said that's a very neurotypical way of talking about conversation. And I was just so grateful, because I hadn't thought of that really before. I work with a lot of individuals who are on the spectrum, and it hadn't even really fully occurred to me that for someone, and I know this to be the case, for someone who might be on the spectrum, direct eye contact can be uncomfortable or actually, traumatizing. And if you're trying to force something that doesn't work for someone, and I was forever grateful for this, because I learned something very powerful in that moment of the water that I was swimming in, and I think that's what we need to try and learn and figure out. How do we find these ways where we can have these opportunities to learn about these more subtle aspects of other people's lived experiences that might not be our own.
Yeah, my wife gets quite frustrated with me sometimes because she will say something about a person. Maybe they were not very attentive to her, no, didn't give me eye contact, maybe they're a bit dismissive or something about them. She goes, "Oh, that person." And I said, "Well, okay, I take on board what you're saying there, but that's a bit of a judgment. You don't know anything about their lived experience. You don't know what's going on in their heads. They may not be a great communicator for various reasons. So the fact they haven't communicated with you in a way that you're comfortable with doesn't mean to say they're a bad person or being ignorant or being nasty to you. It just means that that is their style. So what we have the opportunity here is to meet people in the middle, adapt your style halfway to their style, and see if you can encourage them to speak in a kind of centrist way." And I'm also guilty when I talk about EQ, emotional intelligence, having to recognize that neurotypical people tend to use emotions, but maybe neurodiverse people don't use emotions in the same way. So expect someone to pick up the emotional cues, the body language cues, is something that is kind of neuro. What's the equivalent of heteronormative? Yeah, neuronormative behavior that we're trying to judge people by what we expect. I think it's really, really important, as you're saying, just to remember that when you're making these judgments or making these big decisions about people, we've got to try and think about their lived experience first.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, going back to the workplace, having a workplace that's really welcoming of our identities. The workplace is fraught with uncountable number of ways that it says you don't belong if you're ADHD or you're on the spectrum, or there's maybe you just have an incredible amount of social anxiety and you're still asked to stand up and give some sort of talk. Even something as that kind of anxiety that we can feel around who we're speaking with and what we're talking about. What would happen if we just stopped for a moment in our interactions in our daily lives and went, what don't I understand or know about this situation or this conversation or this person? And we truly approached everything from a place of curiosity, genuine curiosity and compassion. How different would this world be?
Yeah, it's. I mean, we're obviously kindred spirits and like-minded in this, and it's for us to have this conversation. Maybe that's a privilege as well for us being able to have this conversation, where it means we're far enough back from that cold face of injustice that we can start to self-analyze or become self-aware. But often the case is where people are living it in that moment, in that toxic environment. And whether you're a fan of Maslow's hierarchy or not, if you're living right at that those bottom two layers where your safety and psychological safety is really, really important to you, then you don't often have the chance to step back and think. You're just living in the moment. You have no next week. It's all today, isn't it?
It's very true. I think what you're speaking to is how much trauma exists in the workplace. And we don't often think about it or talk about it as trauma. There's trauma with a big T and trauma with a little t. And trauma with a big T is something where you've experienced some sort of something where your physical integrity or your life has felt at stake, your safety, etc. And then little t is things where they're more than just a typical stressor. Something like a kind of a nasty divorce, for example. In the workplace, we have both. A lot of people's identities are constantly being threatened in the workplace. And again, it's that water we don't realize we're swimming in if we don't have those lived experiences. There are so many ways the workplace says this, you do not belong here. And if you're just trying to navigate that and understand what's safe or unsafe, and it's really just unsafe, that is trauma with a big T. Your physical, your integrity, your life, your who you are is being threatened in the workplace. And the whole approach around DEI is not just about saying, let's have some representation. It's about, how do we have a workplace where people truly feel safe to show up as who they are, as a whole person, and not carve away different parts of their identity in order to fit in.
I was surprised recently. I hired a couple of people to come on into my business to help do some social media and some marketing and some videos and graphics. Some really clever, intelligent people. And I truly believed that I set the tone as an open culture. This is most wholeheartedly not a top-down company. This is we're all sitting on the floor, we're all cross-legged, we're all talking about what we need to talk about. There's no right or wrong answers. There's no, psychological safety is high. If you want to say anything to me, you've got as much right to tell me that my idea sucks as I've got to tell you your idea sucks. And I was having a chat, and I sort of said, "Come on, tell me." And they said, "No, I can't tell you. I'm too nervous to tell you what I'm thinking." So there I was with my arms open saying, "Come on, surely you can say anything. Now you've told me you can't tell me. Now I want to know more." And they just said, "Look, sometimes with my exuberance, I'm kind of creating a little bit too much pressure or too excitement about something, and they feel they're always having to try and keep me happy and feed my ideas." And I said, "Oh, wow, no, seriously, thank you. No, I had no idea that's how you perceived me, as someone who was creating loads of pressure. You didn't want to let me down. There's fear of failure, all this kind of stuff." And I said, "Wow, thanks, thank you." It's kind of, that's really, well, upset me a bit because I thought I was creating this culture where you could say anything, but B, it was the self-awareness of going, well, actually, as hard as I thought I was trying, I still missed, not in a bad way, but in a not a perfect way. And I think one of the things you're talking about with the fish are swimming in their water and they don't see the water, is that maybe people who hold the privilege, and I'm not one to demonize straight white men, because we need straight white men to change the world, because they have the biggest swords and shields in the world, so we need them to do the change. But many people believe they're a great person and they think they're doing fantastic work. That they don't realize that power dynamic and that culture they've created, no matter how much they didn't want it, does exist. So that recent lesson that I learned was, you have to not only believe you're creating a culture, but you have to be active and proactive about it and reach out and make sure the culture you hope you're breeding is in fact reality, not just in your head. People around you believe it as well.
I really love that, because I think it also speaks to this whole idea of wanting to get it right, not to just feel like we're right. That is so foundational to this work. We have to, because it is, we need to seek out, we sort of, I'm trained as a scientist, and I appreciate my mentors in graduate school because they really taught me true science, how to be a true scientist. Whereas you try and figure out how you can prove yourself wrong if you're actually wrong. How do you figure out that? That's what true science is. You create a study where you're saying, okay, here's my hypothesis. I'm going to do everything in my power to prove it wrong. And then if I have, some sort of, a significant finding, I'm going to be able to lean into that more, but I'm still going to try to figure out how I got it wrong. Because that is what we do. We have to constantly refine and think about everything in a different way. How can we, I don't remember who this quote was by, but they said, in order to improve, at least one of our basic core assumptions has to change. We have to be constantly thinking about, where am I stuck? What am I not seeing? How can I get this information so that I can see more clearly?
And the other thing about the science community, or the communities of scientists, is that they're willing you to disprove it as well. And when you do find a new solution or a new formula or a new mantra, you're celebrated by the people whose previous mantra has been superseded, because it's in striving to find a betterment is by examining and not believing that everything you have is fact. And I think that's, we could learn that as a society. And we know about confirmation bias. We love being right, don't we? We're scared of being wrong because it makes us feel weak. And there's a great saying. I don't know if you've come across this. There's a forecaster called Paul Sappho, and he coined strong opinions weakly held. So it's all about knowing what you've got your beliefs, you've got everything, but you're not a prisoner to them. You're challenging yourself. You're looking to prove yourself wrong all the time. And I always say it's not about going down conspiracy theories. I'm proudly vaccinated. If there's a vaccine, give it to me. Both arms, both legs, if you have to. I'm going to go straight in there. Some people aren't, but I want to find out why they believe that, and not because I want to agree with them, but I want to understand why their perspective is. So Novak Djokovic, when he was deported from Australia for not being vaccinated, I completely disagree with the outcome he's come up with, his decision. But actually, when I listened to his interview, and he said, I wanted agency over my own body, I went, I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree with his logic, because it's his body. He should have, I want the right to do what I want to do with my body. Okay, the impact is maybe on other people, but for that moment, he has the right to decide what he does with his body. And I thought, yeah, okay, I go with that.
I think what you're speaking to here as well is that a lot of these conversations are really tricky. And what we tend to do as humans is we make things oversimplified and very either or. And, it's all this or all that. And most people are not comfortable wading into the discomfort of ambiguity and uncertainty. And that's why I call this my superpower, because I am supremely comfortable wading into conversations where it's like, ooh, I have no idea what the answer is. How do I get more information? This conversation is really tough because bodily autonomy, again, that true stand side by side, bodily autonomy is really important. We're having conversations in the US about, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, and forced pregnancies are a real thing here. So bodily autonomy is absolutely important. And public health and community and caring about each other, and that my choices for my body in this instance with vaccines impact other people and their safety, right? You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You have to wear, there's all sorts of things. You have to stop at stop signs. If there's a pedestrian crossing, there are things we have to do. When it comes to masks, well, are you a person wearing a shirt? Well, then you don't have full bodily autonomy, to make your choices on what you wear or don't wear. And I think these are those conversations where everybody's either this or that. And we don't have a lot of people who are willing to say, this is really hard to figure out. Let's put our heads together and see if we can come up with something that solves for this dilemma.
And that's exactly what I found about Djokovic. I said, you've got the right not to be vaccinated, but the consequence is you can't play in the tennis match, you can't stay in Australia, and the chances are you won't be allowed to play in many other matches around the world, and people may cancel their sponsorship because that's your decision. So the consequence of you having bodily autonomy, which you're entitled to, are that you can no longer participate freely in society in the way you once did. Having autonomy doesn't mean say you can kill somebody or be nasty to somebody or hurt somebody. Society says no. But even you can have autonomy, but there are consequences. So it's making sure that those consequences are explicit and well known, so you can't be caught out by them. But you have a responsibility as a human, as a citizen, as a participant in our culture. I know what's expected of me. It's in the same debate I have around trans rights, and I understand my responsibility as a woman in female spaces. And I know I shouldn't have to, but I blend. I make myself as minimalistic as possible in those spaces. I don't want to be a threat or be seen to be a threat to anybody. I take my responsibility to be allowed unfettered access to places by the way I behave. If I went in there and behaved in a way that made me stand out and a threat, then I would expect not to be welcomed. And I would expect people to look at me and with a different look. Whereas today, people look at me and smile. So I accept my responsibility and my choices in order to access society in the way I want to access it.
What would happen if we all just took this conscientious lens for how we show up for each other? Because that's what you're describing. You're describing having this intentional, conscientious way of showing up in spaces where you're thinking about your impact on other people. And it's important for this, if we could all find this way to navigate the world. I do have a caveat in that I understand how when you hold an identity that is so marginalized and oppressed and mistreated and in so many different ways, I understand the anger that comes with all of that. And I always try and keep that in mind as well, because in a way, like as you were describing how you show up in spaces with other women, I would not expect you to have to hold yourself to that level of self-reflection in the moment. I would hope that we could get to a world where you can just show up.
I agree. I agree.
You don't have to think
agree.
about those things.
Yeah.
And if you're angry,
the cognitive load to maintain that concentration and that, as you say, this intentionality around what my behavior is, I'm not relaxed. I'm not bringing my whole self to all spaces, but I do bring most of myself to most places. It's just there are certain places where there's a pinch point where I know that, hang on, this is a good place to do this. Everywhere else I'll do that. I mean, a classic example is I've chosen not to change my voice, have voice coaching, or even actively manage my voice. So when I'm in those spaces, I will not have a conversation. So if I'm with my wife in the toilets or the changing room, something like that, and she starts talking to me, I'll just look at her and go, I'm not talking. I'll just give that look. I'm not going to say a word in here. If I cough, I'm very conscious about my cough because it's quite a deep sort of cavity cough, or sneeze, or all those kind of involuntary sounds you make in your body. I'm very conscious of them because if the doors are shut, people can't see you, they hear you, and they make assumptions. So by being minimalistic, it's not, I wouldn't say I feel unsafe, but I'm more worried about other people feeling unsafe more than me. So I don't want to be a threat to anybody. So if I create a persona around me where people perceive that I'm different, then they may feel less safe. And so my empathy is out there and the compassion is out there that I don't want to cause that to anybody else. So I'm not purely thinking about my safety. I'm just thinking about the respect for the space.
And I think that's beautiful. And it brings my heart incredible amount of joy to know that you do have that sense of safety, because that is what we need to have. And if we can get to a place where you don't have to be thinking about how you just showing up as you are, feeling unsafe to someone else, if we can get to this place, I mean, even when it comes to transgender rights and even across my work with the transgender community, I've been amazed at my own journey at understanding it's not even just, I used to have a little bit more simplistic view. It's like, oh, I'm in the wrong body, or, my gender doesn't match my body parts. And what I've learned over time is that there's so many incredible ways that you can be transgender and be totally comfortable with who you are, whether it's you change your voice or you don't change your voice, you change facial hair or you don't change facial hair, any kind of gender confirming surgery. There's so many different ways that you can show up as a woman who's transgender, or a man who's transgender, or a non-binary person who's transgender. There are so many ways you can show up as just who you are. And my hope is that we get to a place where you don't have to think about, will somebody else feel unsafe because they might hear a deeper tone of voice in the stall, because that's just something that's normalized and celebrate. That's just, yeah, there are women who have deeper voices.
Yeah,
And
but
that's okay.
it's not just the queer, LGBTQ plus, the trans community. It's people who are Black experience this all the time. If they're on their own in a white area or a white space, they're worried that they may be seen as a threat as a Black person in a white space. And so it's any marginalized community that's been demonized and misrepresented. It has this covering and masking that they need to do in order to navigate those spaces.
It's so sad to me. As a white woman, I am so keenly aware of how I am perceived. And it's interesting because I remember at the beginning when do you remember the safety pin back? I don't know if this was a thing that happened in the UK, but in the US, when the election 5 years ago happened, and there were a lot of unsafe spaces being actively cultivated. We had this thing, it was the safety pin movement. And if you wore a safety pin, you were safe for, I'll go to the bathroom with you. If you're wearing a hijab, I'll sit next to you on the bus, etc. And it was really interesting because all of a sudden I realized I don't get to have that. I don't get to say I'm safe. I don't get to tell you I'm safe. And in fact, it is my responsibility to hold the systemic injustices that exist, racism and transphobia and Islamophobia and all of that. I have to hold that as part of my responsibility for that being an accomplice or a co-conspirator, which I, again, won't call myself that, but that is what I aim to be. I have to hold that as a white woman in any space, the perceptions of me, I might not personally deserve those because I do think that I show up for social justice, but I have to hold that because the system and structures are in place that maintain that lack of safety for people who are Black or Muslim or trans. I benefit unfairly from this system. This system is built in a lot of ways, and especially there's a whole conversation around specifically being a white woman. The system works for me in a way that I don't get to put down. I don't get to say, okay, I'm just going to take a day off from that. So it is my responsibility to hold this until I am a part of demolishing these systems and structures that are in place that maintain this oppression. That is my responsibility. And I don't get to be deemed as safe until that is true.
Erica, thank you. Thank you so much. We've been chatting away for an hour, and I think that's a really good place to leave it with those thoughts you've just given us there. So how can people get hold of you? It's been an amazing conversation. I'm sure there'll be other people who want to have a chat. So what's the best way to get hold of you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can Erica Simon, and I think it's even LinkedIn. The handle is Erica Simon PhD, and then you can also reach me through Erica ERICA at seriesb.co. That's SERIESBE.co. That's my work is around how do we really address toxic work environments. And so you can reach me there, and I welcome any future conversations. This has been amazing, and I really appreciate and thank you. And it's been such an honor to be in this space with you.
Likewise, thank you. I'll put all of those links in the show notes. So if you're listening, just check the show notes; they'll be there. So finally, it's a huge thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in, for getting to the end. I really appreciate this. Please put some comments. Tell us what you think of this episode and others. Do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. Please share the link, share the love. I have a number of other exciting guests lined up that I'm sure you'll be equally, if not I don't know, could you be more inspired? I'm not sure, equally inspired maybe, but over the next few weeks and months. And also, if you'd like to be a guest yourself, maybe you've got a story, you've got a message that you'd like to share, or you've got some feedback or suggestions, please do let me know to joe.lockwood@teachingchapman.co.uk. And the last thing I'd like to say is my name is Joanne Lockwood, and it's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.